Michael Walker, a retired Army captain, had been looking forward to this evening for weeks. After serving his country for many years, he had finally returned to his hometown. And tonight he was meeting up with some old friends he hadn't seen in a long time. He felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as he got ready to head out. Dressed in a simple but neat outfit, he glanced at himself in the mirror one last time, smoothing down his shirt. His deep brown eyes reflected a man who had seen a lot, but who was ready to enjoy a peaceful night with friends. The restaurant he was heading to was one of the fanciest in town. It had always been a place where people went to celebrate special occasions, and Michael had saved up to make sure he could treat his friends to a nice dinner. He remembered the restaurant from years ago, a place full of warmth and laughter. But as he walked through the door that night, something felt off. The inside of the restaurant was just as elegant as he remembered. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the tables covered in white linen cloths. The air smelled of delicious food, and the sounds of quiet conversations and clinking glasses filled the room. But as Michael stepped in, the welcoming atmosphere he had hoped for wasn't there. The hostess, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, stood behind a tall podium. She barely glanced up as Michael approached. When she finally did, her eyes flicked over him quickly, and her expression turned cold. Michael smiled politely and said, "Good evening. I have a reservation under Walker." The hostess didn't return his smile. Instead, she looked down at her list and then back up at him with a frown. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" she asked, her voice flat and unfriendly. Michael was taken aback. "Yes, I'm sure," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. She sighed and looked at him again, this time with a hint of irritation. "You can wait at the bar," she said, waving her hand dismissively toward the back of the restaurant. Without another word, she turned her attention back to her list, ignoring him completely. Michael's heart sank. He had hoped for a warm welcome, but instead he felt like he was being pushed aside. But he wasn't one to cause a scene. He nodded and made his way to the bar, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling that was settling in his chest. The bar area was crowded and noisy, very different from the quiet elegance of the main dining room. People were laughing and talking loudly, and the bartenders were busy mixing drinks and serving customers. Michael found an empty stool and sat down, hoping to order a drink while he waited for his friends to arrive. But as he sat there, he noticed something strange. The bartenders seemed to be serving everyone around him, but they didn't even glance in his direction. He waited patiently, raising his hand a couple of times to get their attention. They just ignored him. Minutes passed and Michael's patience began to wear thin. He watched as other customers, many of whom were dressed in fancy clothes, were served quickly and with a smile. But every time he tried to get the bartender's attention, he was met with indifference. It was as if he was invisible. Finally, one of the bartenders, a tall man with a smirk on his face, sauntered over to him. "What'll it be, soldier boy?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Michael felt a pang of anger but kept his voice calm. "I'd like to order the ribeye steak, medium rare, with a glass of your best red wine," he said. The bartender chuckled, a sound that was more mocking than friendly. "Sorry, we're all out of that fancy stuff, but I can get you some pretzels and a warm beer if you're interested," he said, his eyes gleaming with a cruel kind of amusement. Michael felt his face grow hot with anger and embarrassment. It was clear that the bartender was making fun of him. He looked around the bar, seeing the smirks and sideways glances of some of the other patrons. He realized they had been watching him the whole time, enjoying the way he was being treated. Something inside Michael snapped. He had dealt with disrespect before, but this was different. He had served his country, put his life on the line, and now back home, he was being treated like he didn't belong. But instead of lashing out, Michael did something unexpected. He stood up from the stool, his broad shoulders straightening with determination. He looked the bartender directly in the eye and said, "No, thank you." His voice was firm but controlled. Without another word, Michael turned and walked out of the restaurant, his heart pounding in his chest. As he stepped into the cool night air, he took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside him. He felt hurt, angry, and humiliated. But more than that, he felt a burning resolve. Michael knew he couldn't let this go. He wouldn't let anyone make him feel small or unworthy. As he walked down the street, his mind was already working on a plan. He would return to that restaurant, but when he did, it would be on his own terms. And this time, things would be very different. Michael walked back to his house, his mind racing with thoughts about what had happened at the restaurant. The night was quiet, but inside, he felt anything but calm. He couldn't stop thinking about the way he had been treated, The dismissive look from the hostess, the mocking words of the bartender, and the cold indifference from the other patrons. It all played over and over in his mind like a bad movie. When he finally reached his front door, he paused for a moment before going inside. He looked up at the sky, taking a deep breath to steady himself. Michael had faced many challenges during his time in the military, but this felt different. It wasn't just about him being ignored or insulted. It was about something bigger. It was about respect, something he had always valued and shown to others, and now he had been denied that basic courtesy in his own hometown. As he entered his house, the familiar surroundings brought him a bit of comfort. The walls were decorated with framed photos of his time in the service, medals, and certificates of honor that recognized his bravery and commitment. These reminders of his past achievements should have made him feel proud, but tonight, they only deepened his resolve. Michael sat down in his favorite armchair, the one he always used when he needed to think. He could have been angry, could have let his emotions get the better of him, but that wasn't his way. Instead, he knew he needed to do something more meaningful, something that would make a real difference. He thought back to the faces of the people in the restaurant. They had judged him without knowing anything about him. They had assumed things because of the way he looked, the way he dressed, and maybe even because of his skin color. But Michael knew that confronting them with anger wouldn't change anything. What they needed was to understand, really understand, what respect and equality meant. As these thoughts ran through his mind, an idea began to form. It started as a small spark, but the more he considered it, the clearer it became. Michael decided he would return to the restaurant, but not just as a customer. He would go back with a message, one that would make everyone in that room think twice about how they treated others. With a clear plan in mind, Michael picked up his phone and began making calls. The first person he contacted was his old friend, Sergeant Jake Thompson. Jake was a tough Marine who had served alongside Michael in some of the most dangerous places in the world. They had seen each other through thick and thin, and if there was anyone Michael could count on, it was Jake. "Jake, it's Michael," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need your help with something important." Jake's voice came through the phone, gruff but full of concern. As the day turned into evening, Michael sat back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. His friends were not just joining him out of loyalty. They were joining him because they believed in the cause. They believed in the need to show that respect and dignity should be given to everyone, regardless of their appearance or background. Michael's phone buzzed with messages of support throughout the night. His fellow veterans confirmed their plans to meet him at the restaurant the next evening, each one expressing their determination to make a difference. The sense of unity was palpable, and Michael knew that together they could make a powerful statement. The next day, as the time for their meeting approached, Michael felt a mix of emotions: anticipation, resolve, and a touch of nervousness. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew it was necessary. They weren't going there to cause trouble. They were going there to stand up for what was right. Michael looked at his uniform, which he had laid out on the bed, freshly pressed and ready. As he put it on, he felt the familiar weight of the medals on his chest, each one a symbol of the sacrifices he had made and the values he held dear. He was ready for whatever might happen, knowing that his friends would be by his side. As he made his way to the meeting point, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just in himself, but in the people who were willing to stand with him. They were about to walk into that restaurant not just as veterans, but as a symbol of strength, unity, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserved to be treated with respect. And together, they would show everyone in that restaurant just what that meant. The mood in the restaurant was tense as Michael and his friends, dressed in their immaculate military uniforms, finished their meal. The staff, who had treated Michael with disrespect the previous day, now moved about nervously, unsure of what might happen next. The patrons, who had been watching the group of veterans with a mix of curiosity and unease, whispered among themselves. Everyone expected some sort of confrontation, but what happened next was entirely unexpected. Michael stood up slowly from the table, his movements calm and deliberate. His friends followed his lead, each of them rising silently. There was no anger in their eyes, no harsh words on their lips. Instead, there was a quiet strength that filled the room, commanding attention without the need for a single word. The manager, who had been hovering nearby, looked nervous as he approached. "Is everything all right, sir?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. Michael nodded, his expression serene. "Everything is fine," he replied simply. But instead of heading for the door, as many had expected, Michael walked to the center of the restaurant, where the light was brightest. He stood there for a moment, his friends gathering around him in a circle. The restaurant fell into a hush, the only sounds the clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation dying down as people turned to watch. Then, without saying a word, Michael removed his hat and bowed his head. The other veterans followed suit, their heads lowering in unison. It was a gesture of respect, but it also carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. The silence in the restaurant became almost deafening, as if the very air was holding its breath. The other diners looked on, puzzled at first, but then something began to shift in the room. What had started as confusion slowly turned into understanding. This wasn't a protest of anger. It was a demonstration of dignity. Michael and his friends were standing there silently, not to demand respect, but to show it, both to themselves and to everyone around them. Minutes ticked by, each one filled with the quiet power of the moment. The staff, who had been so dismissive before, now stood frozen, their earlier arrogance replaced by a deep sense of shame. The patrons, who had expected drama, found themselves caught up in the solemnity of the scene unfolding before them. Michael didn't need to say anything. His silence spoke louder than any words ever could. The message was clear. Respect isn't something you forcefully take. It's something you give, even when others might not have given it to you. As the moment stretched on, something unexpected happened. One by one, the other diners began to follow the veteran's example. A man at a nearby table removed his hat and bowed his head. A woman across the room did the same, and soon the entire restaurant was filled with people standing in silent respect. The manager, realizing the gravity of the moment, felt a lump form in his throat. He had never imagined such a powerful response, and now, faced with the quiet unity of the veterans and the patrons, he felt the full weight of his previous actions. This wasn't just about one man being treated poorly. It was about how easily people could forget the value of respect and kindness. After what felt like an eternity, Michael finally lifted his head. His friends did the same, and together they looked around the room, taking in the sight of everyone standing with them. There was no anger in Michael's eyes, only a deep, quiet resolve. With a nod to his friends, Michael turned to the manager, who stood there, unable to speak. "Thank you for letting us have our meal," Michael said softly, his tone polite but firm. "We'd appreciate it." Then, without another word, the veterans began to leave the restaurant, moving as one. The silence remained thick and heavy, even as the door closed behind them. Inside, the staff and patrons were left standing in stunned silence, the full impact of what they had just witnessed sinking in. It was a moment that would be talked about for years to come, a simple act of quiet dignity that had more power than any angry confrontation could ever have. As Michael and his friends walked away from the restaurant, the night air felt cool and refreshing. They didn't need to say much to each other. They all knew they had done something important, something meaningful. And as they walked, Michael felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had faced the disrespect of others, not with anger, but with a quiet strength that had changed the hearts of everyone who saw it. It was a stand, not just for himself, but for all those who had ever been treated as less than they deserved. In that moment, Michael knew that respect was something that had to be shown, even when it wasn't given freely. And in the end, it was that quiet stand that left the deepest mark on everyone who witnessed it. As Michael and his friends walked away from the restaurant, the patrons and staff remained in a state of quiet reflection. The powerful silence they had left behind lingered like an unspoken question. But Michael knew that their message, though impactful, needed more than just silence to truly resonate. It needed understanding, connection, and most importantly, stories that could bridge the gap between perception and reality. The following evening, Michael decided to return to the restaurant, this time with a different approach. He wasn't alone. Once again, his veteran friends accompanied him, their presence just as strong and united as before. But this time, there was no silent stand. They were there to talk, to share, and to connect. As they entered the restaurant, the staff and diners greeted them with a mixture of respect and curiosity. The tension from the previous night had eased, replaced by an atmosphere of anticipation. The hostess, who had been so dismissive before, now greeted them with genuine warmth. Her demeanor entirely changed. The manager, who had heard about the events from the night before, approached them with an apologetic smile, offering them a table in the center of the room. Michael accepted the offer graciously, and soon they were seated, the restaurant's attention once again focused on them. But this time, instead of silence, Michael broke the ice with a soft, steady voice that carried through the room. "Thank you all for allowing us to join you again tonight," Michael began. "Last night, we made a silent stand to show that respect is something every person deserves. Tonight, I want to share with you why that respect means so much to us." The room grew even quieter as Michael's words hung in the air. He looked around, making eye contact with the other diners, some of whom had witnessed the previous night's events. Their curiosity was palpable, And Michael knew that now was the time to connect, to make them understand not just through actions, but through stories, stories that would bring their experiences to life. He began with his own story. I served in the army for over 20 years. I've seen things that I wouldn't wish on anyone. I've lost friends, brothers, and sisters in arms who gave everything so that we could all sit here today in peace and enjoy a meal together. That's what service means to us. It means sacrifice, it means loyalty, and it means love for this country and for each other. The room was silent, every word sinking deep into the hearts of those listening. Michael's voice was calm, but filled with emotion as he continued. I remember one night in the middle of a battle, I lost one of my closest friends. We had been through so much together, and in that moment, I felt the weight of every decision I had ever made. But I also felt something else: pride. Pride in knowing that we were fighting for something bigger than ourselves, something worth every sacrifice. That's why it hurts when we're treated like we don't belong, like our service doesn't matter. Because every uniform we wear, every medal we carry, represents a story, a life, a sacrifice that should never be taken for granted. It was wrong and it was hurtful. You deserve better. You all deserve so much better. The veterans watched him, their expressions unreadable. Mr. Jacobs felt a knot of fear in his stomach, worried that his apology might not be enough. But he pressed on, determined to show them that he meant what he said. When you walked in here tonight, I was afraid, he admitted, his voice quiet but steady. I was afraid because I knew we had messed up, and I didn't know how to fix it. But listening to your stories has made me realize that fixing it starts with acknowledging our mistakes and learning from them. He turned to the staff, who were standing nearby, their faces pale with a mixture of guilt and uncertainty. This isn't just about what happened yesterday, Mr. Jacob said, addressing them directly. It's about how we treat every person who walks through these doors. We need to do better. We need to be better. The staff nodded, some of them looking down at the floor, clearly affected by the manager's words. Mr. Jacobs continued, his resolve strengthening with every word. I'm going to make sure that every single person who works here understands what it means to respect others. We're going to have training, real training, on how to treat people with the dignity they deserve, regardless of their appearance, their background, or anything else. He looked back at Michael, his eyes full of sincerity. I can't change what happened yesterday, but I promise you, Michael, that it won't happen again, not here, not under my watch. For a moment, there was silence. Then Michael stepped forward, his expression softening. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs, he said, his voice calm but firm. We'd appreciate your apology and we accept it. But like you said, it's about more than just words. It's about making sure that everyone who comes here is treated with the respect they deserve. Mr. Jacobs nodded, relief watching over him. You have my word, he said. We'll do better. And if you ever feel like we're not living up to that promise, I want you to tell me. I want to make this right. The tension in the room began to lift, replaced by a sense of understanding and mutual respect. The other diners, who had been listening intently, began to relax, some of them even smiling in approval. It was clear that something had shifted, not just in the restaurant, but in the hearts of those present. As the evening continued, the atmosphere in the restaurant changed. The staff, now more aware of the importance of their actions, moved with a renewed sense of purpose. They served the veterans with genuine warmth and respect, making sure they were comfortable and well taken care of. The diners, too, seemed more engaged, more connected to what was happening around them. Mr. Jacobs, the restaurant manager, approached Michael's table with a broad, sincere smile. His earlier nervousness had melted away, replaced by a genuine warmth and respect. Michael, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We would be honored if you and your friends would allow us to serve you tonight as our guests. It's the least we can do to show our gratitude for your service and to begin making amends for how you were treated. Michael looked around at his friends, seeing the quiet approval in their eyes. He turned back to Mr. Jacobs and nodded. We'd be glad to stay, he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of forgiveness and hope. The manager's smile widened, and he gestured for the waitstaff to come over. Please let us take care of you tonight, Mr. Jacobs said as the waiters approached, ready to serve the group with the utmost care. As the evening unfolded, the veterans were treated with the kind of respect that every diner deserved. Their orders were taken with attention and care, and each dish was presented with the utmost professionalism. The staff, once indifferent, now moved with a sense of purpose, their actions reflecting the lessons they had learned. The veterans, dressed in their uniforms, were a striking presence in the room. Their stories had touched the hearts of everyone present, and now, as they dined, they continued to share those stories. Not just with each other, but with the staff and the other diners as well. What began as a simple meal quickly turned into something much more. A meal of unity where walls of misunderstanding were broken down and new connections were formed. One by one, other patrons began to approach the veterans' table, tentatively at first, but with growing confidence. They offered their thanks, their respect, and in some cases, their own stories of family members who had served. The conversations that blossomed were rich and varied, touching on topics of respect, diversity, and acceptance. A young couple seated nearby leaned over to speak with Michael. "We just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "My grandfather was a veteran, and hearing your stories tonight made me think of him. I'm so grateful for everything you've done." Michael smiled warmly at her, his eyes softening. "Thank you," he replied. "It's important that we remember those who served and the sacrifices they've made. I'm glad our stories resonated with you." Nearby, another veteran, a woman who had served in the Air Force, was deep in conversation with a group of younger diners. They listened intently as she spoke about her experiences and the challenges she had faced as a woman in the military. The respect in their eyes was clear, and as she finished speaking, they thanked her for her service, expressing their admiration for her strength and resilience. The conversations flowed naturally, bridging gaps of age, race, and experience. The restaurant, once a place of exclusion, had transformed into a space of inclusion, where differences were celebrated and understanding was fostered. As the meal continued, the staff, too, found themselves learning from the veterans. The waiters and waitresses asked questions, seeking to understand more about the lives of those they served. They listened with genuine interest as the veterans shared their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. What had once been a job filled with routine had now become an opportunity for growth, for learning, and for developing a deeper sense of empathy. The manager, Mr. Jacobs, watched all of this with a deep sense of satisfaction. The change in his staff and his restaurant and in the patrons was evident. The restaurant had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a place where important conversations were happening, where people were connecting in ways they hadn't before. By the time dessert was served, the restaurant was buzzing with a new kind of energy. The veterans, once the focal point of attention, were now the heart of a larger, more meaningful dialogue. The conversations had expanded beyond the veterans themselves, touching on broader themes of respect, diversity, and acceptance. Patrons who had initially been hesitant were now fully engaged, sharing their thoughts and listening to others. As the meal came to an end, Michael looked around the room, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. What had begun as a night of discrimination had transformed into a night of unity, understanding, and change. He knew that the impact of this evening would last far beyond the walls of the restaurant. The connections that had been made, the stories that had been shared, and the lessons that had been learned would ripple out into the world, touching lives in ways that couldn't be measured. As the veterans prepared to leave, the diners and staff alike stood to offer their thanks. There were handshakes, hugs, and even a few tears. The restaurant had become a place of healing, of connection, and of hope. And as Michael and his friends walked out into the night, they knew that they had not only made a difference for themselves, but had also paved the way for a better future for all who would follow in their footsteps. If this story moved you and you'd like to hear more inspiring tales filled with emotion, suspense, and powerful messages, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll never miss an update, and you'll be the first to know when we share more stories that touch the heart and challenge the mind. Hit the notification bell so you can join us on every journey, every story, and every moment that matters. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue to bring you the content you love. Thank you for being a part of our community.